What you're about to hear may sound almost impossible, but it is unfolding. Shati and Safri and Fein and right now. Shut the UN. And the consequences could send Sakibi and Sepandir Shati shockwaves through global trade, supply chains, and consumer prices for years to come. So, Yanstar your ear. Just hours after Canada's dramatic legal action reportedly locked down more than $500 billion in U.S.-linked investments, leaving millions of American investors suddenly unable to freely access their own assets, another bombshell hit. And this one could affect everything from the cost of your phone and laptop to the price of groceries, furniture, and everyday household goods. At exactly 11:47 a.m. Eastern. An emergency announcement out of Ottawa sent the global shipping industry into immediate panic. Canada's Transport Minister Forby and Sams Fridan San Si Andiu and I Omar Al Gabra stepped forward and revealed what was officially described as temporary port access restrictions for national security reasons. But make no mistake, this was far bigger than a routine security measure. This was a sweeping maritime shutdown. Starting at 16 that same day, so the for same sounds now and the fein chin dao, U.S. commercial shipping access to Canadian ports would be found fully suspended. Shall you? That means Nux and the Chachiu and Shafudiwais. U.S.-flagged vessels, ships carrying America-bound cargo, and even vessels owned or operated by U.S. companies are now barred from Canadian waters and denied docking rights at every major Canadian port. Instantly, and for an undefined period. Pause for a moment and really think about what that means. This is not just another diplomatic disagreement. This is the sudden removal of a high sunding critical pressure valve in North America's trade infrastructure, and one that has quietly supported American commerce for decades. And before we go deeper, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching BCC News from right now. The US, Canada, Europe, Asia, or somewhere else, because no matter where you are, this story could impact your economy more than you realize. Now let's break down what just happened. Canada didn't merely close a few small regional terminals. This decision impacts the Hosei for EU, not San entire national port network. Major hubs including Haringki, Hidobi, and the B ports, Vancouver, Prince Rupert, Montreal, and Halifax, along with dozens of smaller facilities, are all affected. Together, these ports process roughly $380 billion in annual trade of that. And here's the number that matters most. Roughly $140 billion of that cargo is directly tied to U.S. trade oil. That includes U.S. exports leaving through Canada, imports entering the U.S. via Canadian routes, cargo simply transiting Canada on its way elsewhere. Overnight, that entire system has been cut off. For decades, Canadian ports acted as the overflow engine for American trade. So, whenever U.S. ports became congested, and they often do, companies relied on Canadian infrastructure as the faster, cheaper, and often more efficient alternative. That safety valve is now gone. And this is where the crisis begins to spiral. U.S. ports are already operating near full capacity. They were never designed to instantly absorb an extra $140 billion in displaced cargo volume. So So, when that traffic is forced to reroute, and it has to, it doesn't slide smoothly into place. It creates massive bottlenecks, so isay dahad. We're talking about downs and tedium sounds and downs. Ships waiting offshore for days or weeks, on containers piling up in storage yards. Rail systems getting overwhelmed. The trucking schedules collapsing. Warehouses facing overflow. Store shelves eventually feeling the pressure. That's why the reaction has been so immediate and so intense. Behind the scenes, global logistics firms are in full emergency mode. Shipping routes optimized over decades have suddenly become obsolete. Contracts are being rewritten in real time. Insurance costs are climbing. Freight rates are surging. And right now, there is no quick fix. Even Donald Trump is reportedly facing intense pressure as advisors attempt to explain the true scale of what just happened. Because this isn't something that can be solved overnight. You cannot simply build new ports and erase the disruption. Infrastructure at this scale takes years, sometimes decades to develop. So what exactly has America just lost? Let's begin on the Pacific side. The Bambi Mandar Port of Vancouver is Canada's largest maritime gateway and one of the busiest ports in all of North America. Every year, it handles millions of containers, along with enormous volumes of grain, coal, industrial equipment, consumer goods, and electronics. A huge portion of that, roughly $45 billion annually, has direct ties to U.S. trade. Why? Because for many American companies, it is often faster to land cargo in Vancouver and move it south by rail than to deal with congestion in Los Angeles or Seattle. That entire route is now gone. Then comes King and Spankakri and Prince Rupert. Another crucial Pacific hub. Smaller than Vancouver, yes, but strategically priceless. It is the closest North American port to Asia, allowing ships to arrive days faster than major U.S. West Coast alternatives. That time advantage made it one of the most valuable high-volume shipping routes for U.S. companies moving goods into the Midwest. Now that route is gone too, and that's only the Pacific side. On the Atlantic coast, the situation is equally severe. Montreal has long served as a critical hub for transatlantic cargo between North America and Europe. Halifax offers one of the fastest Atlantic access points from Europe into the continent. Both have served as essential alternatives when East Coast U.S. ports faced congestion. Now both are unavailable. When you add it all together, roughly $140 billion in annual U.S.-linked cargo has been displaced. This is no longer a disruption. This is a systemic trade shock. Now here's where this story becomes even more dangerous. The natural assumption is simple. If Canada closes its ports, the U.S. will just reroute everything internally. But the numbers destroy that theory. America's major ports, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Newark, Savannah, Seattle, already process around 50 million containers annually. They are already stretched near their operational ceiling. Now they are being asked to absorb an additional finans kanatiaban sambans and nadirin and prio veyer sans 5 million containers almost instantly. That is an immediate 10% surge. In global logistics, a sudden 10% spike is not manageable. It is the difference between smooth movement and full-scale gridlock. Port capacity depends on Dunstan and Dainchi, Arch, Fin, and docking berths. A Machi Dan Saim Satsi heavy crane availability. Anshins Naubing Dei Dan Sins the storage yard turnover. Truck throughput. Istong sa iitsam sao bing sa rail connectivity. I'm seeing stong sa fuing and inland warehouse flow. Every single one of those systems is already under pressure, and once delays begin, they compound. One delayed vessel creates another, then a queue forms. And suddenly a regional bottleneck becomes a global supply chain backlog. That's why major shipping lines began reacting almost immediately. Global giants like Maersk started suspending services tied to Canadian ports. Cargo originally bound for Vancouver is being redirected into overloaded U.S. ports. The result? Minimum delays of 2 to 3 weeks, and potentially longer. And when demand for port access exceeds supply, prices don't gently rise. Dixingdown, Wang Sam Heg Fein Stapter for year, explode. Fern Sav Thou Dingxing Di Angel. Congestion surcharges and cho and ambulance sands are just priority handling fees. Adambi's Thompson Nimsanda storage penalties, expedited transport premiums. Those costs move directly through the supply chain. Manufacturers pay more, retailers pay more, and eventually consumers pay more. By mid-afternoon, companies like Walmart, Target, and Home Depot were reportedly already issuing internal alerts about possible supply disruptions. Think about what that means. Electronics, furniture, clothing, appliances, home goods, and auto parts. A huge portion of these supply lines just became more expensive, less reliable, and far less predictable. And if this disruption stretches into peak retail seasons, inventory gaps begin appearing fast. Shelves don't refill on time. Prices rise. A shipping crisis becomes an inflation story. But the most shocking twist may be this: the rest of the world is still allowed access. Europe still has access. Japan still has access. South Korea still has access. This is not a blanket shutdown. This is targeted trade leverage. That means global trade routes are already beginning to reroute around the United States. European goods can still enter through efficient Canadian Atlantic hubs. Asian exporters can still use Prince Rupert and Vancouver. Meanwhile, U.S. firms are forced into slower, more expensive alternatives. This gives foreign competitors and immediate efficiency advantage. And markets notice that quickly. Analysts now estimate rerouting costs could rise by 25% to 35% per shipment, translating into billions in added expenses. And these changes can become permanent, because once new shipping habits form, they often become the new normal. That's how global trade maps change. Not instantly, but through repeated adjustments that eventually harden into permanent routes. So where does this go next? There are 3 possible paths. For scenario 1, fast de-escalation. The U.S. agrees to Canada's conditions. Talks progress. Ports reopen within days. Short-term pain, limited lasting damage. Geister scenario 2, months of disruption. Delays stretch into months. Costs surge 30–40%. Shortages emerge. Retail and agriculture feel the strain. Scenario 3, permanent trade realignment. The U.S. is forced into a decade-long infrastructure rebuild. Canada strengthens ties with Europe and Asia. Global trade routes permanently evolve away from old North American patterns. And right now, the world appears to be hovering between Scenario 2 and Scenario 3. At this very moment, 140 billion in U.S.-linked cargo is displaced. Costs are rising. Delivery times are slipping. Global routes are reorganizing. Supply chains are under pressure. This is what happens when a critical system loses one of its most important components. Everything slows. Everything gets more expensive. And the ripple effects spread farther than anyone expects. Because one thing is already undeniable. This is not just a port closure. This is a turning point in North American trade power. If you want more deep dive global trade breakdowns, breaking geopolitics and economic power shifts before they hit mainstream headlines, make sure you like this video, subscribe to BCC News, and turn on notifications. Because here at BWST and GND and BCC News and the one CI free and we don't just cover the event. She and sane and free. We show you the power moves behind the crisis.